The phone screen illuminated the darkened living room, casting a pale glow across the faded wallpaper. It was 2 a.m. outside. The howling wind of the worst winter storm of the decade battered against the frosted window panes. But inside, the only sound was the relentless buzzing of the device on my oak coffee table. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't expected to see: Chloe. My daughter. I sat perfectly still in my worn leather armchair, an old habit from my decades serving as a combat medic and search and rescue specialist in the Air Force. A sharp throb radiated from my left knee, an old piece of shrapnel embedded near the joint, serving as a permanent reminder of a failed extraction mission 20 years ago. It always ached when the temperature dropped, but tonight the pain was a raging fire. That man was me. The headline flashing in bold red letters read, "Mystery Hero Saves 15 in Blizzard Tragedy." I swiped the green icon on my phone. Before I could say hello, Chloe's voice erupted through the speaker, frantic and breathless. "Dad. Dad, why is your face on every major news network? Are you even listening to me? Twitter and Reddit are exploding right now. They found out who you are." Her voice cracked, thick with an anxiety that felt entirely foreign to the poised, image-obsessed woman she had become. I leaned back into the worn leather of my chair, letting out a slow, measured breath. "I am listening, Chloe," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the physical exhaustion threatening to pull me under. "They're calling Richard," she practically screamed, referring to her new husband. "Reporters are calling his corporate office. They are asking why an elderly disabled veteran was out volunteering alone in a deadly blizzard on Christmas Eve instead of being with his family. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to his promotion? To our reputation? Welcome to my life. I am a retired military rescuer, and I am also the father whose own daughter banned him from setting foot in her house for the holidays. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever poured your entire soul into protecting someone, only to have them discard you the moment you no longer fit their perfect aesthetic? Leave a comment with the number 1 if you know exactly how that betrayal feels. And make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the way this story unfolds is going to satisfy every ounce of justice you crave. Just remember, this is a fictional story, but the lessons woven into it are as real as it gets. I stared at the swelling around my injured knee. I had sustained fresh trauma to the joint while kicking out the reinforced safety glass of that bus. Every nerve in my leg was screaming in agony, yet the physical torment was nothing compared to the absolute frost in my daughter's tone. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She didn't ask if I needed an ambulance. Her only concern was the fragile ego of her wealthy husband. I only answered the questions they asked me, I said evenly. There was no venom in my words, just a profound, echoing emptiness. "You couldn't have just stayed home." Chloe snapped, her panic morphing into cruel accusation. "You always have to play the martyr, don't you? You couldn't just let us have one perfect holiday without making it all about you." Just 72 hours earlier, this exact same voice had delicately, carefully, and ruthlessly cut me out of her life. Now she was demanding that I fix the fallout of her own cruelty. They cared about Richard's image. They cared about maintaining the illusion of the perfect, affluent suburban family. And I, the man who had worked night shifts loading cargo planes just to pay for her elite private university, was the stain they were desperately trying to scrub out. "I understand," I said quietly. I didn't wait for her to unleash another barrage of accusations. I ended the call and placed the phone face down. The suffocating silence of my small house rushed back in, broken only by the low hum of the vintage refrigerator in the kitchen. I closed my eyes, letting the cool draft from the window wash over my face. It had been a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The sky was the color of bruised iron, threatening the massive snowfall the meteorologists had been warning us about. I was in my garage wiping grease off my hands with an old rag. I had just finished rebuilding the carburetor on my vintage 1970 Ford Bronco. It was honest, solitary work that kept my mind sharp. I wiped my hands one last time and walked out to meet them. "Chloe, Richard." I nodded, keeping my tone cordial. Richard didn't offer his hand. He simply glanced at the grease stains on my flannel shirt and let out a small, patronizing sigh. "Arthur, still playing in the dirt, I see. You can pay people to fix those old junkers for you." "It's not about the destination, Richard. It's about knowing how the machine works," I replied calmly. I had never liked the man. He was a corporate vice president of a tech firm, a man who believed a person's worth was entirely determined by their net worth. Speaking of which, He was currently wearing the vintage Omega Seamaster I had gifted him on their wedding day, a watch my own father had given me. He wore it, but I knew he despised it for not being a modern smartwatch. "We can't stay long, Dad," Chloe interjected, her eyes darting nervously between me and the driveway. She looked everywhere but at my face. "We actually just came to drop some things off." Richard popped the trunk of the Mercedes. Inside was a medium-sized cardboard box. He lifted it out and practically dropped it into my arms, forcing me to shift my weight to protect my bad knee. "Just clearing out some old junk from the guest room," Richard said smoothly, a predatory smirk playing on his lips. "We need the space. We're turning it into a home gym." I felt a tight knot form in my throat, but I kept my expression neutral. "I see. Thank you for bringing these back, actually." "Dad, there's something else," Chloe said, her voice dropping an octave. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the cold air. "It's about Christmas Eve." I looked up. "I've already picked up the prime rib. I was thinking of coming over around 6 to help you prep." Chloe winced. She exchanged a quick, knowing glance with Richard. He gave her a slight nod, urging her forward. "Dad, we think it might be better if you didn't come this year," she said, the words rushing out of her mouth like she wanted to get them over with as quickly as possible. The frigid wind seemed to stop. The world went entirely still. I stood there holding a box of my discarded history, trying to process the sentence. "Excuse me?" Richard stepped forward, taking control of the conversation with the practiced ease of a corporate negotiator. "Look, Arthur, let's be realistic here. My family is flying in from Connecticut, my parents, my sister, her kids. They are accustomed to a certain atmosphere during the holidays. An elegant atmosphere, a catered dinner, classical music, a formal dress code." I ignored Richard completely and locked eyes with my daughter. "Chloe, is this what you want?" It was the ultimate betrayal. The man standing next to her had been in her life for barely 2 years. I had spent 30 years protecting her, sacrificing my own happiness, working myself into the ground to ensure she never wanted for anything. And now, I was being dismissed because my presence didn't fit their curated aesthetic. I looked at the ceramic mug in the box. "World's bravest dad." What a joke. Bravery didn't matter in their world. Only appearances did. "I understand," I said softly, my voice devoid of emotion. I had survived interrogations. I had survived shrapnel. I would survive this. I turned and walked back into the garage, placing the box on my workbench. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury I had abandoned a long time ago. Instead, I opened a drawer and pulled out an old, heavy-duty tactical duffel bag. If they didn't want me at their holiday table, I wasn't going to sit at home drowning in self-pity. I had skills, I had purpose, and there was a massive storm coming. My initial plan was simply to patrol the remote county highways, looking for stranded motorists. The local emergency services were going to be stretched incredibly thin, and a trained veteran with an equipped vehicle could be the difference between life and death for someone trapped in a ditch. But there was one detour I needed to make first. I drove carefully through the affluent, gated neighborhood where Chloe and Richard lived. The houses here were massive, sprawling estates decorated with professional synchronized light displays that cost thousands of dollars to install. I parked the Bronco a block away from their address, leaving the engine running. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up a small, meticulously wrapped box. Inside was the vintage Omega watch. I had found it sitting inside the cardboard box of junk they had returned to me. Richard hadn't even bothered to take it off the watch pillow. He had just tossed the whole case in with my old letters. That was the final insult. I turned my back on the golden light and walked back into the suffocating darkness of the storm. It happened around midnight. I was navigating a treacherous, winding section of the highway known as Dead Man's Curve. It was a steep elevation with a sheer drop-off into a forested ravine on the right side. The wind was howling so loudly it sounded like a jet engine. Suddenly, my headlights caught a flash of reflective metal torn and twisted against the guardrail. My stomach plummeted. A massive commercial passenger bus had skidded on the black ice, smashed through the reinforced steel guardrail, and rolled onto its side. It was currently resting on a precarious slope, held back from tumbling into the deep ravine only by a cluster of thick pine trees. Black, acrid smoke was pouring from the rear engine compartment, mixing with the blinding white snow. I slid down the icy embankment, the jagged rocks tearing at my pants and scraping my bad knee. I ignored the flash of pain. As I approached the undercarriage of the bus, the sounds of pure terror reached my ears. People were screaming, crying and slamming their fists against the reinforced windows. The front windshield was completely crushed against a massive tree trunk. The emergency roof hatches were pinned against the frozen ground. The only way in was through the side windows, which were currently suspended in the air, angled dangerously toward the drop-off. "Hold on! Help is here!" I roared, my voice cutting through the shrieking wind. I peered down into the chaotic darkness inside. The interior was a nightmare of tangled limbs, crushed seats, and scattered luggage. The smell of leaking diesel fuel hung heavy in the air. We didn't have much time before a spark from the engine ignited the whole wreck. "Listen to me," I barked using my command voice. The sheer authority in my tone shocked several of the hysterical passengers into silence. "I need everyone who can move to make their way to this window. Do not panic. Move slowly and help those who cannot walk." The first person to reach the opening was a young woman, her face covered in blood from a deep laceration on her forehead. She was hyperventilating, her eyes wide with shock. "Slide down the side and move up the embankment toward the headlights of my truck," I told her. "Go, I can't, my legs," she gasped, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I've got you, ma'am. You're going to be fine," I said, forcing a calm, reassuring smile. I leaned precariously into the opening, wrapping my arms under her shoulders. I had to lift her dead weight straight up. The strain on my lower back and injured leg was monumental. My muscles screamed in protest, but I didn't stop pulling until she was safely out. "Is there anyone else down there?" I screamed into the darkness. "Help, please, I'm stuck!" a voice cried out from the very front of the wreckage. I didn't hesitate. I dropped down through the window, navigating the treacherous, slanted interior like a jungle gym. I reached the front. The driver was completely intoxicated, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. He had endangered dozens of lives because he decided to drink on the job. Disgust flared in my chest, but the mission comes first. Within minutes, state troopers, paramedics, and a heavy rescue team swarmed the scene. They secured the bus with steel cables just before the trees gave way entirely. Medics rushed to triage the passengers I had lined up near my Bronco. I sat against the front tire of my truck, wrapping a pressure bandage around a deep gash on my forearm. I was cold, exhausted, and bleeding, but for the first time in years I felt a profound sense of purpose. I had made a difference, but no good deed goes unpunished. I let out a weary sigh. I just wanted to go home. I gathered my gear, intending to slip away quietly. But as I turned, a blinding flash of light exploded in my face. Sir, we are live on Channel 8 News. Authorities are saying you single-handedly saved 15 people before emergency services arrived. You're a hero. Tell us, what were you doing driving on this treacherous mountain pass in the middle of a blizzard? Were you rushing home to be with your family for Christmas? I stared blankly into the bright camera light. The question echoed in my mind, rushing home to be with my family. I thought about the massive house with the perfect decorations. I thought about Richard's sneer and Chloe's ashamed glances. I thought about the box of my memories sitting in my garage, waiting to make room for a stationary bike. I didn't want the spotlight, but I was done hiding the truth to protect their fragile, pristine image. A cold, absolute calm settled over me. I looked directly into the lens of the camera. My voice was steady, cutting through the howling wind with lethal clarity. "No," I answered, my tone completely flat. "No one is waiting for me. My daughter explicitly told me not to come to her house this year. She and her new husband felt my presence would ruin their perfect holiday aesthetic. They didn't want an old mechanic embarrassing them in front of their wealthy guests. My house was empty, so I decided to come out here and see if anyone needed help instead." By the time I woke up late the next morning, pouring myself a black coffee, the world had exploded. The clip of the abandoned hero father had been uploaded to YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter. It garnered 5 million views in 6 hours. People were captivated by the dramatic rescue. But what truly ignited the absolute fury of the internet was my cold, heartbreaking statement at the end. The internet is a terrifyingly efficient machine when it wants justice. Within hours, sleuths had identified me from my military records. From there, it took them less than 20 minutes to find Chloe's public social media profiles. They found Richard. They found his LinkedIn. They found the tech company, where he served as vice president. The backlash was a tsunami of biblical proportions. But the real damage hit Richard. His company's social media pages were absolutely besieged by furious consumers, demanding his immediate termination. Boycott hashtags were trending globally. His corporate stock dipped 3% by noon. The illusion of their perfect, untouchable life had been shattered into a million jagged pieces. At exactly 1 p.m., a frantic knocking hammered against my front door. It wasn't the press. They were gathered at the end of my driveway, held back by local police. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Standing on my porch was Chloe. Her eyes were red, puffy, and completely bloodshot. Her expensive cashmere coat was hastily thrown over pajamas. Standing next to her was Richard, looking like a man who was walking to his own execution. His face was pale, his hair disheveled, his arrogance completely evaporated. And standing behind them was Linda, my ex-wife. She looked exactly as I remembered her, sharp, haughty, and deeply annoyed by my existence. I closed the door slowly, leaning against the frame. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Fix what, Richard? My life, he shouted, throwing his hands in the air. The CEO just called me. They are talking about suspending me. The PR department is having a meltdown. We are receiving death threats, Arthur. Death threats. All because you couldn't just keep your mouth shut on national television. I simply answered a question, I replied, my voice dangerously soft. Was anything I said untrue? Chloe burst into tears, stepping forward to grab my arm. I flinched away, not wanting her to touch me. She froze, hurt flashing across her face. Dad, please, she begged. You don't understand what's happening. The internet is destroying us. My friends won't even answer my texts. You have to release a statement. You have to tell them you were confused, that you had a concussion from the crash, that we love you, and it was all a big misunderstanding. I looked at the three of them. They were cornered rats. They had come to my home, invaded my space, and even now, they weren't here to apologize for hurting me. They were here to demand that I lie to protect the very vanity that caused this situation in the first place. I walked past them, setting my coffee mug on the kitchen counter. I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. The mayor's office called me an hour ago. I said, not looking at them. They are holding a press conference at the Civic Center tomorrow afternoon to officially award me the Citizens Medal of Valor. Every major news network in the state will be broadcasting live. Richard's eyes widened. A desperate, hungry gleam appeared in his expression. It was the look of a drowning man spotting a life raft. He was practically hyperventilating with excitement. He truly believed he could write the script of my life. He believed I was just a pawn to be moved around to protect his corporate kingdom. I looked him dead in the eye. A slow, chillingly calm smile spread across my face. Okay, I said quietly. I will do the speech. Thank you, Arthur. I knew you'd see reason. Richard said, his arrogant smirk beginning to return. We'll send a car for you tomorrow at noon. Wear a suit, a nice one, if you actually own one. They left as quickly as they came, completely convinced they had successfully manipulated the naive, old veteran one last time. They didn't realize they had just handed me the microphone for their own public execution. The next afternoon, the grand hall of the Civic Center was packed beyond capacity. The massive room hummed with the electric tension of hundreds of reporters, politicians, and local citizens. The glaring lights of television cameras illuminated the wooden stage where the mayor stood, looking incredibly pleased with the optics of the event. I sat in the front row, wearing my dark navy dress uniform from the Air Force. The rows of ribbons on my chest gleamed under the lights. It fit perfectly. I sat with perfect, rigid military posture. Just remember the script, Arthur, Richard whispered out of the corner of his mouth, leaning in close. You thank the rescue teams, you talk about family unity, and you call us up. Don't mess this up. I didn't acknowledge him. I simply kept my eyes fixed on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor announced into the microphone, his voice booming over the speakers. Today we gather not just to honor bravery, but to celebrate the profound spirit of community and sacrifice. When disaster struck our mountain pass, one man did not hesitate to drive into the storm, a retired military specialist, a father and a true hero. Please welcome Mr. Arthur Sterling. The hall erupted in deafening applause. The standing ovation was immediate. I stood up smoothly, ignoring the dull ache in my knee, and began walking toward the stairs. Richard gave my shoulder a firm, encouraging squeeze. Go get 'em, Dad, he whispered loudly enough for the nearest microphones to pick up. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out over the sea of faces, letting my gaze sweep the room before finally resting on the front row. On Chloe, on Richard. Richard nodded encouragingly from his seat, flashing a thumbs up. When a man faces life and death, He learns to strip away everything that doesn't matter. I continued. He learns to see the world with absolute clarity. 2 nights ago, when I pulled 14 terrified strangers from a burning wreckage, I looked into their eyes. I saw immense gratitude. I saw the desperate desire to live. I saw the profound value of human connection. I paused. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the quiet hum of the camera equipment. Many of you have seen the news segment from that night. Many of you have reached out, offering support, asking how a man ends up alone in a blizzard on a holiday. I gripped the edges of the wooden podium. Yesterday, my daughter and her husband came to my home. They were terrified, not for my safety, not for my health. They were terrified because the truth was hurting their brand. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The camera shutters instantly went into a frenzy, clicking like machine gun fire. The smug, rehearsed smile instantly vanished from Richard's face. He turned ghostly pale, gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. Chloe slapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening in sheer horror. They asked me to stand up here today and lie to you, I stated, my voice completely devoid of anger, delivering the words with the cold, surgical precision of a sniper. They demanded that I use this platform, this honor, to fabricate a story about a loving, unified family to save his corporate vice presidency. They wanted me to tell you that banning me from their home, because my clothes weren't expensive enough, because my presence didn't fit their aesthetic, was just a simple misunderstanding. I spent 30 years in the military. I fought for the truth. I fought for integrity. I said, my voice rising just enough to command the entire hall. I will not stand on a stage meant to honor the survivors of a tragedy and sell my soul to run a public relations campaign for a man whose only concern is his stock portfolio. I looked directly at Chloe, whose face was buried in her hands, shaking uncontrollably. Then I locked eyes with Richard. He looked like he was about to vomit. To my daughter and her husband, I said quietly, the microphone catching every chilling syllable. You wanted your perfect, flawless aesthetic without the embarrassment of an old soldier bringing you down. Congratulations. You have it, but you do not have me. I am no longer your shield. I am no longer your father. I am nothing to you, and you are nothing to me. I took the velvet box containing the medal, placed it gently on the podium, and stepped back. Thank you for your time. Honor the survivors. I turned and walked away. I didn't walk back to my seat in the front row. I walked straight down the center aisle, heading toward the grand exit doors at the back of the hall. I didn't look back as I reached the heavy oak doors. 4 uniformed police officers quickly flanked me. The sergeant in charge gave me a sharp, respectful salute. Sir, we have a cruiser waiting out back. We will ensure you are not harassed by the press, the sergeant said, his eyes filled with profound respect. Thank you, Sergeant. I nodded. I walked out into the crisp, cold afternoon air, the chaotic noise of the hall fading behind me. I climbed into the back of the patrol car. As we drove away, I felt a massive, invisible weight lift off my shoulders. The chains of guilt, obligation, and unrequited love that had bound me for decades were finally shattered. The fallout from the ceremony was apocalyptic. The live broadcast became the most watched news clip of the year. Richard was completely destroyed. His company didn't just suspend him. The board of directors fired him with cause under a morality clause in his contract, stripping him of his severance package. His reputation in the corporate tech world was permanently incinerated. Nobody would hire a man who was publicly exposed as a sociopathic narcissist on national television. 3 days later, the knock came. I was in the garage, finally getting around to changing the spark plugs on the Bronco. I walked out to find Chloe standing in my driveway. She was alone this time. She didn't arrive in a Mercedes SUV, she had arrived in an Uber. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. Arthur. I corrected her coldly. What do you want? Chloe? Richard left, she choked out, tears spilling down her cheeks. When he lost the job, when the bank froze our assets, because the mortgage on the house was tied to his corporate equity, he just packed his bags and went to his parents' house in Connecticut. He blamed me for everything. He said, if I had just managed you better, none of this would have happened. I felt a brief fleeting flicker of pity, but I stamped it out immediately. She made her choices. She aligned herself with a monster because she liked the money he spent on her. I'm bankrupt, Dad, she sobbed, taking a step toward me. The bank is foreclosing on the house next week. My credit is destroyed. I have nothing. Please, I know I was awful. I know I don't deserve it. But please, can I come stay in the guest room? Just until I get back on my feet. Can you loan me some money for a lawyer? She was playing the ultimate card. The desperate daughter pleading for the unconditional love of a father. Years ago, I would have immediately handed over my life savings. I would have taken a third job to pay for her mistakes. Not anymore, the guest room is full, I said, my voice flat, devoid of any warmth. Full? She stammered, looking confused. With what? With my self-respect, I replied. I pulled a folded document from my flannel shirt pocket and held it out to her. I met with my attorney yesterday morning. I sold this house to a private developer. I took my entire life savings, my pension fund, and the equity from this property, and I transferred it into an irrevocable trust. Chloe stared at the paper, her eyes wide with terror. A trust? For who? For the families of the victims who died in the bus crash, I answered coldly. And for a college scholarship fund for the teenager I pulled out of the window. There is nothing left, Chloe, not a single dime. You wanted to live in a world governed by wealth and status. Welcome to the bottom rung of the ladder. You can't do this to me, she screamed, her sadness instantly converting back to vicious entitlement. I'm your daughter. You owe me. I don't owe you a damn thing, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying rumble. I paid my debt when I gave you 30 years of my life. You threw it away for a man who abandoned you the second the money dried up. Learn to survive, because I am done protecting you. I turned around, walked back into the garage, and hit the button to close the heavy steel door. I didn't watch her cry in the driveway. I simply went back to my engine, picked up my wrench, and went back to work. The sound of the door sealing shut was the most satisfying noise I had ever heard. A week later, the snow had melted, leaving the city crisp and clear. I sat at a corner booth in a quiet, warmly lit Italian restaurant downtown. I was wearing a clean button-down shirt. Across the table from me sat Eleanor, the silver-haired woman from the bus. She had invited me to dinner to personally thank me for saving her life. She smiled warmly as she poured me a glass of red wine. You look different than you did on the television, Arthur. You look lighter. I am, I smiled, taking a sip of the wine. It tasted incredible. I dropped a lot of dead weight recently. Well, whatever you did, it suits you, she laughed, raising her glass. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. As I looked out the window at the bustling city street, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The pain in my knee was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a badge of honor. The ultimate revenge isn't about screaming, or violence, or stooping to the level of the people who hurt you. The ultimate revenge is surgically removing toxic people from your life, cutting off their access to your energy, and letting their own terrible choices destroy them. Your worth is never defined by the seat someone offers you at their table. If they don't want you, flip the table and build your own. Love should only be given where it is fiercely valued. Never lower your standards to beg for the scraps of affection from selfish people, even if they share your blood. We are incredibly grateful you stayed with us until the very end of this journey. If Arthur's story resonated with you, if you believe in setting unbreakable boundaries and demanding respect, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Join our community of storytellers and share this with someone who might need the courage to walk away from a toxic table. Until next time, keep your standards high and your boundaries higher.